Hi folks, it's Tom at Psych Safety again. Today we're going to be talking about power, and specifically the power gradient, the power differential, and in other domains these are called different things. It might be known as the authority gradient, the cross-cockpit authority gradient in aviation. Power distance, that's sort of at a cultural level, and if you've heard of Hofstede's cultural dimensions, then that's part of that. Hierarchy differential is also a similar term, and status asymmetry, which is a kind of similar way to say essentially there's a big difference in power and status between individuals within a group, and that power gradient has a dramatic effect on psychological safety and other things as well. And it's as we've seen through incidents in aviation incidents in the past, like Tenerife 1977, Chernobyl, Challenger, basically loads of disasters and things in the past that we use as exemplars of a lack of psychological safety. A power gradient, a steep power gradient, is one of the most powerful ways to diminish psychological safety and lead to suppressed voice, the suppression of voice or attenuated speech, as it's sometimes called, particularly in CRM and aviation. So we're going to get into power gradients now. So we've talked about what these might be in different contexts, in different domains, power gradients and authority gradients. And we should mention what we mean by power. We should blow this up a little bit. So there are lots of different kinds of power, and lots of people in throughout history have talked about power in different ways. So Rousseau, French and Raven talked about legitimate, reward, expert, referent and coercive power. Raven added an extra power base later on called informational, which is the person who controls the information, which in the day and age of the internet and social media, and you think about people like Zuckerberg, informational power is incredibly strong. Maybe nowadays the most powerful of the whole lot. John Kenneth Galbraith wrote in 1983 about 3 different kinds of power as well. So he wrote about compensatory power, condign power, and conditioned power. And we might, to put these in more accessible terms, we might think about compensatory power is money, condign power is force, and conditioned power is ideology, is belief in ideology, or maybe religion and things like that. Now, this gets pretty complicated, right? So in our workshops, in psychological safety and psych safety workshops, we break this down into 4 core types of power, which are based upon all these. So we stand on the shoulders of giants, based upon all these previous academics and the work they've done. So we break it down into informal, demographic, formal, and expert. Now, let's have a look at formal power first. Actually, formal power is the most easily seen, it's the most easily observed, it's maybe the most easy to understand, and because formal power is imbued by the structures, hierarchies, rules, laws, and things that govern us. So maybe we're talking about the structure of an organization, so who reports to whom, and all the dotted lines and things going on for her. Maybe we're talking about the rules of an organization, the laws in society, and the laws that we're beholden to and we're subject to. And so the laws might be nation states, organizations, or even teams and communities, the social contracts and things as well. So that's formal power. That's quite easy to see because it's often written down. It's a law and an organization structure is often described in words or in a visual format. Informal power is more difficult to see. That's endowed and defined by social status, popularity, networks, so the number of people that we have as friends and connections in our networks, and how highly esteemed we're held in those networks. There's also belief systems and communities, and individual and collective perspectives and histories as well. There's sort of history and folklore and the stories that are told around and about us. Then there's demographic power, and demographic power this is essentially intersectionality. This is a gender, race, age, sexuality, ability or disability, neurodiversity, and all those sorts of aspects of us that in many ways we can't change. Normally, we can't change any of these things. And this is fundamentally privilege and intersectionality, and this is often quite hard to see. It's certainly quite difficult to see when we hold a lot of demographic intersectional privilege power and someone else doesn't, because we don't always see the power that we have. And so this can be more difficult to see. Then there's expert power. This essentially arises from the level of expertise and experience that we possess, and this might be because we have a PhD in something, or we've been with the organisation a long time, and we're regarded as an expert in this field, or this domain, or this system, or this topic, or whatever. And so yeah, so formal, informal, demographic, and expert power. These are the four core typologies of power that we use in our work. And what's important, the reason that these are useful, the reason that this power is useful to differentiate into these is because, first of all, we need to recognize that power gradients are the single most important thing, the single most powerful thing that affects psychological safety and speaking up within group contexts. The steeper the power gradient, the more difficult it is, the less likely people are to speak up. And so how do we address this? Well, one of the first ways we address this is by working out what kinds of power we're talking about. Are we talking about informal power? Is there someone in the room who is CEO and the rest of the people, multiple layers down the hierarchy? Are they people at the sharp end of work? And thus, is there a very steep hierarchical formal power gradient in that space? Maybe it's informal power. Maybe someone in the room has been with the organisation a long time, and they're holding very high social status within the organisation, and that represents a great deal of power to them, and they might not recognise that. So that can be really important to acknowledge. Maybe they're a bit of a celebrity or an influencer or something. Then there's demographic power, and this is, again, privilege. So maybe our gender, our socioeconomic background, our race, or something else is affecting the power gradient in the space. And then, of course, there's expert power. So if we can establish what kinds of power are at play, then we can do something about trying to diminish that perceived power gradient. Now, a lot of this stuff we might not be able to do anything about. We might not be able to affect this sort of power, but at the very least we can acknowledge it and then implement ways and means and behaviours and practices to begin to mitigate the effects of power gradients, and we can get into those in another video. But yeah, so fundamentally this is about recognising the different types of power. And if we think back, I mentioned Tenerife earlier on, if we think back to things like Tenerife and Captain Van Zanten in that cockpit, Van Zanten in that cockpit possessed very high formal power. He was the head of safety and the chief instructor, and he had very high informal power. He's considered a bit of a celebrity. He was on the page of, he was on the adverts and in-flight magazines. He was a white, good-looking guy, and able-bodied, great teeth, great hair, and so he had he had a lot of privilege in that sense. And of course, he had a great deal of expert power. He was very well qualified, and he was well known to be an expert in particularly safety and flying a plane. So he possessed a high degree of all these four kinds of power, which is why in that context, in that situation, that power gradient was so steep. Because once we combine these types of power, power is combinatorial, that leads to a very, very steep power gradient indeed, and it's much more difficult to address. But it is possible, which we're going to do in a separate video. So thanks so much for listening to me today. This was all about power gradients, and the types of power. And if you'd like to find out more about this, head over to psychsafety.com. And as always, like, subscribe, share, and do all of that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next video.